So today's project, I'm going to try to install the Healtech GI Pro X-Type G2 gear indicator sensor. So this is for a 2015 R6, and I do have a fair amount of it disassembled right now. I've been doing some other work, so I've disassembled a bunch of things. But so what do we have here? We have a cable here, which has a bunch of connections, and then here's actually the gear indicator and this fitting right here will hook into that fitting here. So this is actually the easy part, routing that and zip tying it, but making the connections for this cable is actually where I found a fair amount of difficulty. So first of all, to do this, I would certainly recommend removing the gas tank. You need to remove the seat. There's a bracket here which supports the gas tank and bolts into the frame. It's not a bad idea to remove that if you take the gas tank off. And then if you have a rear seat, you'll probably have to remove that. Not necessary, but I think it's going to be a lot easier if the gas tank is removed, so that you can have access to all the wiring and stuff in here. So let's take a look at the connections we have to make. We have this wire here, and it has these white connections go to the speed sensor. The green wire goes to the crankshaft position sensor, and the red wires for power. So we'll start off with the first one. Where is the speed sensor? And if we look in here, it's a three pin connection, and it's white. So this is actually a 2-wire connector. That's not it. Pretty sure this is the actual speed sensor. We're going to check that in a minute. So how do we know this is the speed sensor? So right now the speedometer actually does work. And if we turn the ignition on, and if we spin the rear wheel, you see that the speedometer actually, it did flash 5 for a second there. So the speedometer does work. So if we disconnect that line, if we disconnect this couple and spin the wheel, that speedometer should read 0. So let me do that right now. Okay, so this is part of the reason why I took the gas tank off. It's because you really have to get in here, and only only when looking at this very closely did I notice that the tab to release this connector is on the side that's next to the frame on the right. So I managed to get a screwdriver in here just to depress the tab so that the connector would release. So there's not a lot of room in here, but anyway, you see this doesn't have the connector right here on this part, which feeds into the main harness, is where the little tab is that allows you to release the connector. So I'm gonna leave this as is. I know what we're gonna do now, since this is disconnected, is now I'll turn the ignition on and see if the speedometer reads 0 after I give it a tug. So here's the speedometer, and hopefully I can see that. So I gave it a spin, and the speedometer still said 0, so that is the right connector. So the next thing we have to do is connect or find the wire for the crankshaft position sensor. Well, I didn't know where the hell the crankshaft position sensor was, so I ended up finding online through the service manual that this is, just to cut to the chase, this right here, this line is the crankshaft position sensor. So what we're gonna do is, and this is why you may need to remove the side panel, but this snakes up here, and we follow this around, and then I'm going to try to find out where this comes out. And as luck would have it, I'm feeling with my finger that it is basically at the bottom of this stack. You can see here, you can just barely see my finger, that the wire is coming in at the bottom of that bundle. So the wire is coming in to the frame at the bottom of this giant bundle, which is tied to the with a zip tie to the frame right underneath the gas line. So we're gonna cut this zip tie so that it can actually loosen up some of these wires and try to find where the crankshaft position sensor wire comes into this rat's nest of different wires. So basically, so we can assure ourselves that we're tapping into the right wire. So let me do that. Okay, so we have a lot of wires kind of separated. Here's the speed sensor that we haven't connected yet, and I've separated the crankshaft position sensor wire. So it's I actually relocated it, I disconnected it and reconnected it, so it's obvious which wire that I need to be working on. Now, one of the other things it says is that one of the wires is gray and the other is usually blue-black. Well, if we look at this wire on this side, it's difficult to see, but I mean, the one on the left looks like light gray, and the one on the right looks like dark gray. This is toward the crankshaft side. Now, toward the main wiring harness side, we look at this. Again, difficult to see, but the wire on the left is blue and the wire on the right is gray. So I'm assuming it never really says which wire to connect to, but in the text it says one is gray, and that's in bold, so I'm assuming that is the wire. I'm assuming that's the wire we need to connect, so I guess we'll see. And when we go through the connections, we'll figure out how to, I mean, we're going to test it first before we clamp everything down to begin with. But I'm going to strip some of this, get rid of some of this white kind of cover so we have some room to put that connector in. And then the last thing we need to connect is power. So this says, so the instructions say to connect the red wire to 12-volt wire, like the rear brake light switch, located under the fuel tank. It's a 2-pole brown or black connector. Yeah, so there probably is a connector in here that is specific for the rear brake light. I mean, I'll look around a little bit, but I don't think I'm going to find it. But I do know that this connector right here, this one right here, is for the rear brake. I know that for a fact. And this comes under here, right near the ECU, and then we don't have a whole lot of run here before it feeds into a big giant bundle, which ultimately comes out here. And this is, I mean, this is all, it's all buried in there somewhere. So I'm not sure where you could find the rear brake light switch in here. I mean, I'm going to look around a little bit more, but chances are we're going to have to tap into this wire up here. Now, the downside with that is I'm not sure if there's enough length, so we're going to strip this back and try to look for the brake light connector here, but I'm pretty sure we're going to have to go in use that plug in the back. Okay, so what I did was I had the speed sensor hooked up. I have this crankshaft position sensor wired. I've cut back a little bit so we can expose the wires to tap into that. Obviously be careful when you're cutting this. And what I connected this just so we could have an idea of how much line we have to work with. So if I try to tap into this brake light, we can get to maybe the ECU. So that's about as far as that's really going to stretch. Okay, so one other thing which is maybe not obvious from the instructions, we have these connectors here, and they have, it's kind of seeing cross section is not real easy, but anyway, the wire that's coming from, that's part of the motorcycle, we're going to put it in this, there's like a little channel here that kind of runs this way, and then we're going to feed in either the green or the red wire, whichever one we're working on, feed it in here, and then we use this little block here, this little metallic piece, and that fits right in that little channel here. You basically push it down and it creates a little cut in both the wire, the new wire, and the old wire. It's not super obvious. So what we're going to do is feed the wires in and push this down a little bit to create the connections, just to make sure that we have the right connections at each of those locations. One other thing to keep in mind is that these connections, these little metallic pieces, are really small. So be careful when handling these and putting them in the this connector. If you drop one of these into the engine or that rat's nest of wires, you may never find it again. So exercise some extreme caution assembling that and connecting these wires. So on the rear brake, the wire we actually want to connect into is the blue one. I've seen from other videos that's the one to tap into. I actually did a little test and basically stripped part of the wire and basically probed around until I found the wire which would make this turn on and go L, whatever, 654321. So let me tap into that one, and then we're going to check to see if the rear wheel spins and if it's picking up everything properly. Well, it took a couple tries, but sure enough, that is on now. So it has power. So the thing that's really surprising is that this connection to the blue wire, I thought I'd press that in with basically about the same level of force as this wire, which wasn't much because I knew I would have to take it out. And I actually had to strip the red wire to go probe the connections to make sure it was working, and it was. And so basically I had to use the old trusty pliers to really get that blade in there to make contact with the connection. And so, finally, yeah, let's see if the old wheel is gonna turn. So let me spin the old wheel. Oh, look at that. And it actually does spin. And then the speedometer actually read something non-zero. So, all right, so now I think everything is connected. That one is good. That connection is good. I just need to tighten that down. I need to essentially clean up some of the wiring and put some more zip ties in. And then I'm gonna start the bike up. Okay, I think I got everything routed nice and neatly. So here's the line. I put the mount back on for the old fuel tank. Added some zip ties to kind of clean everything up. I've run the wire out through, basically followed the cable harness, wiring harness, which goes out the left side of the bike. And because I'm going to put the bike, or put the indicator up near the dashboard, I'm going to put the fuel tank on now and make sure, but I'm not going to tighten it down. I'm just going to connect wires and the fuel line to the gas tank. Make sure everything works one last time, and then I'll start the bike up and go through the operation calibration of the system. Okay, finally all done. So for me, after doing the main part of the wiring and then hooking up the gear indicator, that was kind of a piece of cake to go through the calibration. One thing for me is that when that L comes up, and the bike was idling and it had been warmed up, it took a long time, probably like a minute, let's just say, for it to go from the L to the 1. And so during the learning process, and even though the bike is on the rear stand, it it may be kind of intimidating to run the bike up through 6th gear on the gear stand. So that's, just be aware of that. So finally, everything's all nice and packaged here. One thing to keep in mind is that when you put those metallic kind of cutters in between here, and I had to do it a couple times because I had to, it wasn't really engaging the wire, or it slipped out, that you can always use the old needle nose pliers to get that little metal piece out, but don't lose it, obviously. So you have to put in that metal piece enough to cut the wire and to make sure you have the right wire. But if you need to take it out, you can't go too far down, otherwise it'll be really difficult to get out. I mean, otherwise it was, I think it was more work than it should have been, honestly, that to finding all the wires, and it is a pain to work underneath the gas tank when it's up. I haven't tightened the gas tank down yet, but I mean, this is about as far up as the gas tank goes, and if you want to try to work in there, in that region, to dig out all those wires, I mean, you can do it, but it's going to be challenging to do that. That's why I took the gas tank off, and if you just plenty of videos on how to do that. It's the biggest thing on the R6 is when you remove the fuel line, the fuel will tend to maybe like 2 teaspoons of fuel will shoot out. So you have to be mindful of that when you take the fuel tank off. Otherwise, it's fairly easy. And anyway, that's it took longer than I thought, but I guess it's all done, and we'll see how it works out.